What up, YouTube? This is JRJuggernaut1. Welcome to another daily discussion. Before I begin, if anyone knows how to insert an Animoto intro into a YouTube video, please PM me. Need to figure out how to do that, because it's driving me nuts. Maybe it's pretty simple, but I don't know. I need to know to be sure. Now, I talked about the Frog Monarch deck. I thought I'd talk about another deck that kind of rivals the insanity of that deck. Yep, one deck really came to mind immediately. The Herald of Perfection deck. Now, this is a deck I have yet to face, I will admit. However, I've seen the deck work enough that I feel I should give at least my 2 cents on it for now. Now, what is the Herald of Perfection deck, for those of you who haven't heard of it? And I'm assuming all of you have. Herald of Perfection is a level 6 ritual monster, 1800 attack, 2800 defense. You can send a fairy monster from your hand to the graveyard to negate the effect of a spell, trap, or monster effect. It's badass, to say the least, just like Stardust Dragon Assault Mode. Now, one might argue that's not exactly a great effect. I mean, all it does is just you can constantly negate cards. But that depends on how many fairies you have in hand. Well, the deck makes up for that weakness by running more monsters than the average deck. Specifically fairies. It runs plenty of fairies, so you have plenty of cards you can discard. Plus, Dawn of Herald, the ritual spell, its effect allows you to add a ritual monster from your hand to the from your graveyard to your hand as soon as it's ritual summoned. This works because it gives you extra cards you can discard. My problem with this deck, though, is I've still been figuring out how to deal with it. How do you side against this deck? Or what decks have the best matchup, for one thing? Well, I've been thinking about it, and, well, it's pretty hard to say, but I've come up with a few cards. The other problem, though, that comes with facing this deck, though, is the Heralds. That's right, those Heralds where you have to send it and another fairy monster from your hand to the graveyard to negate a spell, trap, or monster effect, depending on what color it is, of course. You had the green and purple Heralds, which came out before, and then the orange Herald, which came out in Crimson Crisis, I believe. And it was a tuner monster, so that actually gives this deck some synchro potential if you want to, if you want to call it that. But still, the deck, it's just annoying, because again, Heralds can negate cards, but you can also negate cards before your opponent even activates them with these Heralds. So dealing with them, again, it's hard. But, like I said, there are ways. I think the easiest way to deal with it is probably using a counter trap like Divine Wrath. Negates the monster effect, and Heralds can't negate it because of it's not spell speed 3. So basically, counter traps are your friend in this case, because there's nothing your opponent can produce besides Solemn Judgment, which will be able to counter it. Now, another card I remembered, now this I figured out by looking at the effect, is a card like D-Fissure or Macrocosmos. You guys know how D-Fissure and Macrocosmos screw over Brionac? Well, it does the same thing to Herald, because you can't send a fairy monster from your hand to the graveyard. And because of this, Herald effects become useless. Thus, of course, though, you can still negate it with the effect of a card like, with one of the Heralds, and you would have to be able to play that card before your opponent has Herald of Perfection on the field. So again, it's iffy. Very iffy. But if you do manage to play it, you're probably in great shape. All you gotta do is be able to play it without your opponent negating it. But again, most decks don't really use it. Glad Beast might use it, and Dimensional Liato's decks use it, but there aren't many. Most decks are pretty screwed over by Dimensional Fissure. But at the same time, it may screw over your opponent's deck more than it screws over you. Think about it. Another card that works is Skill Drain. Skill Drain pretty much does the same thing. It negates your opponent's monster effects, so therefore they can't use its effects. But it also stops your opponent's monster searches, so therefore they can't even add the ritual spell or ritual monsters to their hand. One thing though to keep in mind though is the same thing applies to this card as the same with Dimensional Fissure. You've got a 1 hope your opponent doesn't negate it with a card like no. You got a 1 hope you got to play it before Herald of Perfection hits the field, and number 2, you got to hope your opponent doesn't have any Heralds in hand that they can discard to negate the activation. So again, it's tricky. Timing with this deck is especially essential. You've got to make sure that you play a certain card at the right time, making sure that whatever you play, even if it gets negated by your opponent, you have a backup plan. Hard to say. But the deck is, again, it's becoming more popular. It's good. It's a solid deck. But it's not perfect. I have seen decks lose to it. The problem, though, is I never seem to figure out why they lose. Is it all simply because they get bad draws? Is it because your opponent somehow finds a way to swarm and prevent you from getting the card out? I don't know. I'm also trying to think of a way that you can... Another good strategy would be to remove all the Heralds of Perfection from your opponent's deck or graveyard or something, and then your opponent can't play them again. The problem is I can't think of how you should do that. How do you do something like that? I don't know. Pretty tricky if you ask me, but you know, what can you do? Okay, so that's mostly what I got to say on the deck. It's a good deck. You know, check it out. It's mostly a budget deck, I think. But you know, I guess maybe I'm wrong. The Heralds aren't cheap, though, unfortunately. I think the Ultimates are going for close to 15 now, but could be wrong. Could be worth more for all I know. That I said, the card's only becoming more and more valuable because it's becoming such a good deck. But hopefully people will find a way to deal with it. You know, people know how to deal with X-Sabers, Infernities, Glad Beast, Light Swarm. There's got to be a way to deal with this deck, and I know there is. But only time will tell. This is JRJuggernaut1, signing off.